Imagine waking up on a Sunday morning. The house is completely silent. The sun is shining, a gentle breeze is blowing, and you expect to hear the familiar sounds of your family starting their day. But as you walk down the hallway, you realize you are entirely alone. You look outside. Their cars are parked in the driveway. You walk into their bedrooms. Their clothes are neatly folded, and their purses, stuffed with cash and car keys, are sitting right where they left them. It looks as though they simply evaporated into thin air.
This isn't the setup for a horror movie.
This is exactly what happened on the morning of June 7th, 1992, in the quiet, unassuming town of Springfield, Missouri. 3 women walked into their home, locked the door, went to sleep, and were never seen again. Welcome to Jekyll's Journal. To understand how a nightmare like this unfolds, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to look at the hours leading up to the silence. The day before, June 6th, was supposed to be a milestone. 19-year-old Suzie Streeter and her 18-year-old best friend, Stacy McCall, had just graduated from Kickapoo High School. The graduation ceremony had taken place that afternoon at the Hammond Student Center. It was a day filled with photographs, smiles, and endless conversations about the future. Suzie lived with her 47-year-old mother, Cheryl Levitt, at 1717 East Delmar Street. Cheryl was a popular and meticulous hairdresser who had a devoted clientele of around 250 people at New Attitudes Hair Salon. She had recently purchased the modest single-story ranch-style home in April, just a few months prior, and was spending her free time fixing it up, painting and refinishing furniture. After the ceremony, the 2 teenagers set out to celebrate. The original plan was simple. Suzie and Stacy would spend the evening bouncing between local graduation parties, stay the night at the home of another close friend named Janelle Kirby, and then drive down to Branson, Missouri the next morning to visit the White Water Amusement Park. For the first few hours, everything went exactly according to plan. The girls arrived at Janelle's house in the nearby suburb of Battlefield between 8 and 8:30 p.m., each driving their own car. Suzie in a red Ford Escort, and Stacy in a Toyota Corolla. From there, they walked to a neighbor's party. But around 10:30 p.m., Stacy made a phone call to her mother, Janice. She told her that they were having a good time, but the plans had slightly changed. They had decided that driving all the way to Branson that night wasn't a good idea. So they were going to sleep at Janelle's house and head to the water park in the morning. Around 1:50 a.m., the police broke up a party the girls were attending on East Hanover Street due to a noise complaint. By 2 a.m., Suzie, Stacy, and Janelle were back at Janelle's house in Battlefield. However, the Kirby house was packed. Out-of-town relatives who had visited for the graduation were sleeping in every available space, including Janelle's bedroom. Suzie had recently received a king-sized waterbed from her mother as a graduation present, so she suggested to Stacy that they just drive back to her house on East Delmar Street. It was only a 15 to 20-minute drive, and they would have the space and privacy to stay up late. Janelle's mother, Kathy, who was awake in bed, heard the girls saying their goodbyes. She heard Suzie tell Stacy to follow her home, and Stacy agreed. At around 2:15 a.m., 2 sets of headlights pulled out of the Kirby driveway and faded into the darkness. They arrived at the Levitt home sometime around 2:30 a.m. We know they made it back safely because of what was found the next day. Everything about that night felt perfectly ordinary. It was the kind of humid, quiet Midwest summer evening where time seems to stand still. No one could have imagined that beneath the surface of this celebration, a countdown had already begun. It would be the last time they were all together.
Somewhere between 2:30 a.m. and 8 a.m., a window of just 5.5 hours, something quietly slipped into their lives.
The next morning, at around 8 a.m., Janelle Kirby picked up the phone and dialed the Levitt house to figure out what time they were leaving for the water park. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. By 12:30 p.m., Janelle and her boyfriend Mike Henson decided to drive over to East Delmar Street to check on them. The exterior of the house looked deceivingly peaceful. Cheryl's blue Mitsubishi Eclipse was parked in the carport. Susie's red Ford Escort was in the driveway, and Stacy's Corolla was parked right behind it. They were clearly home. But as Janelle and Mike approached the porch, the illusion of normalcy cracked. Shards of a shattered glass light globe littered the concrete steps, glinting in the daylight, though the bulb itself was still completely intact and functioning. Mike, worried that Janelle might cut her bare feet on the glass, grabbed a broom, swept the shards up, and threw them in the trash. He was just trying to be helpful. He had no idea he was sweeping away what might have been a critical piece of a crime scene.
Janelle reached for the front door. The knob turned without resistance. It was completely unlocked.
Stepping inside, the air felt suffocatingly still. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic, panicked whimpering of Cinnamon, the family's Yorkshire Terrier, darting nervously around their legs. Moving deeper into the home, it was like walking through a museum of a life suddenly interrupted. The beds in both Cheryl and Susie's rooms looked as if they had been slept in, with the sheets wrinkled and the covers pulled back. In the bathroom, damp washcloths and discarded makeup wipes sat on the counter. In Susie's room, the dull hiss of television static cut through the quiet. Stacy's flowered shorts and yellow shirt from graduation night were neatly folded at the foot of the bed. Her severe migraine medication, something she never ever left the house without, left sitting right beside them. Near the stairs, all three women's purses sat together on the floor, fully stuffed with IDs, car keys, over $900 in cash, and their cigarettes. Cheryl and Suzie were heavy smokers. Leaving the house without their cigarettes was almost unthinkable. While Janelle and Mike stood in the center of the living room, trying to make sense of the void, the landline suddenly rang. The shrill sound echoed off the walls. Janelle picked it up, desperate to hear Susie's voice. Instead, there was a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Then, an unidentified male voice broke through, delivering crude, sexually explicit remarks. A wave of revulsion and dread washed over Janelle, and she slammed the receiver down. But a few moments later, it rang again. The exact same ringing in the exact same empty house. The same voice. It was the psychological intrusion of a predator lingering just out of sight, a visceral sign that something was deeply, invisibly wrong. Janelle and Mike eventually left the house to see if the girls had gone to a friend's place. But by the evening, the sinking feeling of dread had spread to Stacy's mother, Janice McCall. Janice arrived at the house around 7 p.m. As Janice walked through the silent home, she noticed the answering machine's message light was blinking. Desperate for a clue, she hit play. A male voice came through the speaker. Janice would later describe the message as incredibly strange and disturbing, but in her state of sheer panic, the exact words slipped from her memory. Tragically, the answering machine was designed to automatically delete messages after they were played. The message vanished into the ether, lost forever. By the time the Springfield Police Department was officially called later that night, the house had been hopelessly contaminated. Throughout the day, between 10 and 20 well-meaning friends and family members had gathered at the house, waiting for the women to return. To pass the time, they had washed dishes, emptied ashtrays, straightened up the rooms, and touched almost every surface. When the police finally arrived, they were presented with a terrifying anomaly. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken locks, and no sign of forced entry. The scene was a complete void of violence. The investigators found absolutely no physical evidence to explain how 3 adult women could be silently extracted from their beds without alerting a single neighbor. Law enforcement theorized that whoever took them must have been armed, using the immediate shock and threat of a weapon to gain complete control. For decades, one primary suspect has cast the longest, darkest shadow over this investigation: Robert Craig Cox. Cox was a former Army Ranger who was highly trained and had a chilling history. He had previously been convicted of kidnapping in California and had even spent time on death row in Florida for the brutal murder of a 19-year-old woman before his conviction was overturned by the state Supreme Court on a technicality. In June of 1992, Cox was living in Springfield, working as a utility locator. When police questioned him about his whereabouts on the night of the disappearances, Cox claimed he had been at church with his girlfriend. His girlfriend initially corroborated the story, but later recanted to a grand jury, admitting that Cox had explicitly told her to lie to provide him with a false alibi. Years later, while serving a life sentence in a Texas prison, Cox sat down for an interview with a journalist. With a cold, unbothered demeanor, Cox stated plainly, "I know that they are dead." When asked how he could possibly know that, he smiled and refused to elaborate, only promising that he would reveal the truth about what happened to the Springfield Three after his own mother passed away. While Cox remains the central figure in the mystery, investigators have chased secondary theories that are equally chilling. There is the possibility of the suspected serial killer Larry DeWayne Hall, who traveled the Midwest in a windowless van, participating in Civil War reenactments, and who was known to be in a town just 30 minutes away that exact weekend. And then there is the cryptic, anonymous note found in a newspaper stand shortly after the women vanished. The note contained a simple, sinister phrase: "Use ruse of gas man checking for leak." It offers a terrifying explanation for how the silent abduction occurred. A man dressed in a utility uniform knocks on the door at 3 a.m. He claims there is a highly volatile gas leak in the neighborhood and that they need to evacuate the house immediately. Bleary-eyed and panicked, the women open the door. Once the door is unlatched, the psychological trap is sprung. Over 3 decades have passed since that warm June night. To this day, despite 27,000 documents, 5,200 tips, and massive media exposure, the Springfield Three remain missing. Their case is a stark reminder that safety is an illusion. You can lock your doors, fold your clothes, and go to sleep in your own bed, believing that tomorrow is a guarantee. But sometimes, people just vanish into the dark, leaving behind nothing but an empty house, an unmade bed, and a mystery that refuses to die.